hit the highlights of what we did talk about. And so I think the main question really came up again was data and trying to get an understanding. So from both sides, the data that B Lab has and how it's being used there, and then also the needs of academics. And I think a good point came up is what do we as academics do with this data, and how do we go about publishing it? So there is practical research, and that is used in one way, and then there's, a real hardcore theoretical research, and that is used in another way. And as researchers, we have different types of agenda. And one of the things that we did suggest was that it would be really nice if there is key points made by B Lab that says, these are the things that we're interested in learning about. And then if researchers are interested, then they can jump onto those particular topics. If it doesn't fit into their agenda, that's okay. We get that out of industry all the time. So I know, from the marketing, I'm sure the management says, here's our things that we're interested in learning about. So that was one suggestion. Of course, the big issue then becomes from the data is how do you match it to public data? And so I know that this is an area that there is awareness on B Lab side that because of the proprietary data, then how do you take it and make it useful so that we really can dig down into research? A suggestion that I have made, because when we work with, in our B Impact teams, we're working with companies, and I'd love to have access to B Analytics, so we form our own community of companies that are entering data, and that way we can begin to access the data for our local community and understanding that, and then we are to get permission from those local communities to allow us to have access to their data, and then we can do the matching ourselves. It ends up being a smaller data set, but it could be a very rich data set on a local level. But then of course there is the need on a bigger level to look at it as opposed to the local. And so I think that was one of the most important points, is that as researchers, we all have different agendas, but we take this from a systemic approach. And that's the other thing. I think we're all business except one sociology. I don't know other. Joe, do you represent engineering? Joe, are you engineering? Is that?
Me?
Yeah. Business.
Although
Okay.
I spent 30 years in
Okay. So I know at NC State, we actually don't work with just the business students. We work with students across campus, and all of our colleges are represented on our B Impact teams. And I think more, we'll hear from Impact teams tomorrow on how their approaches take in. So but we really do take it from a systemic approach. There's a lot of different issues that are coming up. And there was the one comment was also kind of going back to this earlier report. We're talking about B Corp, but should we be reaching out further and looking? We need the controls, right? So all these other companies that aren't approaching it, or maybe they're not approaching assessment, they're not approaching certification, but they do have a culture that sits around this type of business for good. They're just not following the going through B certification. And so how do we as academics make sure that we include that group and understand the similarities and the differences? And so that's kind of another research agenda. Bottom line, lots of research agenda, lots of opportunities. It would be useful for us as academics to have some key points from B Labs that say, here's some things we really care about. Is there somebody that's interested in aligning with that? And then also we talked quite a bit about funding. Where would the funding come from, and looking for grants. I think that was it. Anybody else want to throw in? Okay.